Why did it have to be you first? My mother's voice was as cold as the winter wind outside. Her sharp eyes, full of disappointment, locked onto my stomach, making my skin prickle. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but I never expected those to be the first words out of her mouth. I'm Vera, 26 years old, a housewife, and until this moment, someone who still held on to hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, my mother would finally see me. My older sister, Liana, has always been the perfect one in her eyes. 3 years my senior, she could do no wrong. And yet, here I stood, believing that news of my pregnancy, her first grandchild, would bring us closer. I should have known better. I arrived at my childhood home with my husband, Sam. Liana greeted us at the door with her usual bright smile and a warm hug. Vera, it's been forever. How have you been? My father wasn't home yet, but my mother stood in the living room, arms crossed. Her expression was unreadable at first, but the second she saw Sam, her demeanor changed. She put on a forced smile, the kind she used whenever guests were around. Oh, I wasn't expecting visitors. Let me get something for you. She disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a tray of sugar-heavy pastries. I wasn't surprised. She's always known I don't like sweets, yet she serves them every time. Oh, that's right, she said with fake innocence. Vera doesn't like sweet things, does she? I always forget. I ignored it. I was used to her passive-aggressive jabs. Instead, I reached for Sam's hand and took a deep breath. We came because we have something important to tell you. Mother's gaze sharpened. I'm pregnant. A heavy silence fell over the room. Liana's eyes widened in shock before she beamed and threw her arms around me. Oh my God, Vera. Congratulations, she gushed, squeezing me tight. Sam smiled, his arm wrapped around me protectively. But my mother, her expression turned dark. This should have been Liana's first, she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. I stared at her, stunned. Before I could process what she meant, she stood up abruptly, her movements quick and deliberate. Then, pain. A sharp, unbearable pain shot through my stomach as she kicked me. I gasped, my body crumpling to the floor. Mom, what the hell? Liana's voice broke through the haze of agony. I barely registered Sam dropping down beside me, his voice shaking as he called my name. Liana scrambled for her phone. I'm calling an ambulance, she shouted. Through my pain, I looked up at my mother. She stood there, expression blank, as if nothing had happened. Why are you making such a big deal? She said casually. She just lost her balance. Sam let out a ragged breath, his entire body trembling with barely restrained rage. He was gripping my hand so tightly, grounding me as my vision swam. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Liana knelt beside me, her face streaked with tears. Vera, I'm so sorry. I should have seen this before. I squeezed her hand weakly. It's not your fault. As paramedics rushed in, I caught one final look at my mother. There was no guilt, no regret, just the same cold indifference I had seen all my life. And in that moment, I knew. This was it. This was the moment I finally let go of the illusion that she would ever change. As the ambulance doors shut, Sam leaned close, his voice steady despite his fear. You're safe now. I won't let her hurt you again. I closed my eyes, clutching my stomach, and made a silent promise. This cycle of pain ended with me. The rhythmic beeping of the hospital monitor was the only thing grounding me in reality. My stomach still ached from the attack, but it wasn't just the physical pain that made my chest feel heavy, it was everything. The years of neglect, the favoritism, the way my mother looked at me like I was a mistake she wished had never happened. And now this? Sam sat beside my bed, gripping my hand like he was afraid to let go. His knuckles were white, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought he might break his teeth. I could see the barely contained fury in his eyes, the way his whole body screamed for revenge. But right now, I didn't need anger, I needed reassurance. Is the baby okay? My voice came out weaker than I expected. Sam's expression softened instantly. Yeah, he whispered. The doctor said there's no permanent damage, but they want to keep you overnight for observation. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by exhaustion. I let my head sink into the pillow, exhaling shakily. Vera. Sam hesitated, his voice thick with emotion. We need to talk about what happens next. Your mother. She's not my mother anymore, I cut in. My own words surprised me, but I knew they were true. The moment her foot connected with my stomach, whatever shred of a relationship we had left had been severed. Sam exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. I want to call the police. She should be in jail for this. Before I could answer, the door swung open. Liana walked in, her eyes puffy from crying. She rushed to my side, her hands hovering, unsure whether to hug me or let me rest. I can't believe she did that, she choked out. I always thought she was harsh, but I never imagined. I gave her a weak smile. I don't blame you for not seeing it. She was good at hiding it. Liana sat on the edge of the bed, shaking her head. No, Vera, I should have seen it. I was just so wrapped up in being her perfect daughter that I never stopped to wonder why she treated you so differently. A lump formed in my throat. This was the first time Liana had ever acknowledged it out loud. There was a knock at the door. Before any of us could react, my father stepped inside. I hadn't seen him in months. He looked older than I remembered, his hair grayer, his face more lined. His eyes landed on me, and I saw something I never expected: guilt. Vera, he said softly, his voice unsteady. I'm so sorry. A part of me wanted to scream at him. Where were you when I needed you? Why did you let this happen? But I was too tired for anger. Liana stiffened beside me. Dad, she kicked Vera in the stomach. She could have lost the baby. His face crumpled. He turned to me, shaking his head. I didn't know it was this bad. I thought, he swallowed hard. I thought she was just strict, that it was just her way of, I don't know. But this is unforgivable. I sighed, feeling the weight of years of unspoken words pressing down on me. I don't need an apology, Dad. I need you to finally choose. His eyes widened. Choose? The first nodded. You've spent your whole life pretending not to see what was happening. You looked away while she tore me down, while she favored Liana, while she made me feel like I was nothing. Well, now you have to decide. Are you going to keep standing by her side? Or are you going to be my father? The room went silent. Liana held her breath. Sam's grip on my hand tightened. My father looked down, his shoulders sagging. She's already been calling me, trying to spin this, he admitted. Saying you tripped, saying you're exaggerating. But I heard Liana on the phone. I heard how terrified she was. And now, seeing you here, he exhaled. I can't ignore it anymore. For the first time in my life, my father chose me. A weight I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying lifted off my chest. But it wasn't over yet. Hours passed. The hospital room was dim, the only light coming from the small lamp by my bed. Sam had finally dozed off in the chair beside me, still holding my hand. Liana was scrolling on her phone, probably looking up legal options, and my father had stepped outside to make some calls. Then, the door opened again. I knew who it was before I even looked. My mother. She stood there, arms crossed, her lips pressed into a thin line. Her eyes flickered to Liana, then to Sam, before settling on me. You really went this far, huh? She said, her voice dripping with contempt. Dragging the whole family into your little pity party. Liana shot up from her chair. Are you serious right now? She snapped. You put Vera in the hospital. You could have killed her baby, Mother scoffed. Oh, please. She's fine, isn't she? My hands curled into fists. Get out. She tilted her head, feigning innocence. Oh, so now I'm the villain? After everything I've done for you? I let out a hollow laugh. What exactly have you done for me, Mom, other than remind me every day that I was never good enough for you? She opened her mouth, but I didn't let her speak. I spent my whole life trying to make you love me, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. And no matter what I did, it was never enough. But you know what? I don't need your love anymore. I don't need anything from you. Her expression darkened. You're making a mistake. No, I said, shaking my head. For the first time, I'm making the right choice. Liana stepped between us. If you don't leave, we're calling security. For a moment, I thought she might fight back, that she might scream, throw another insult, or try to justify what she had done. But instead, she turned on her heel and walked out. No final words, no dramatic exit, just silence. And in that silence, I realized something. I wasn't afraid of her anymore. I wasn't the scared little girl begging for scraps of affection. I was free. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and fading flowers. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything. My mother was gone. For the first time in my life, I had stood up to her, and she had nothing left to say. No final blow, no manipulative words to twist reality in her favor. just silence. And yet, I still felt hollow. Sam was sleeping in the chair beside me, his hand still wrapped around mine. He had refused to leave my side, even when the nurses told him he should go home and rest. Liana had dozed off on the couch, exhaustion finally catching up to her. The door creaked open. My father stepped inside, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He set one on the table near Liana before taking a slow sip from his own. "You're awake," he murmured. "Yeah," I said, my voice hoarse. He pulled up a chair beside me, his expression unreadable. "The doctor said you and the baby are stable. That's good news." I nodded, but didn't respond. There was a long pause before he spoke again. "Your mother called me." I clenched my jaw, waiting. "She's furious," he continued. "She says we're turning against her, that she's the victim in all this." He shook his head. But for the first time, I didn't listen. I told her I saw her for who she really was, and I was done pretending otherwise. Something in my chest loosened. "So what now?" My father sighed. "I don't know. She's staying with her sister in another state. She won't be coming back." He hesitated before adding, "I told her I want a divorce." I turned my head toward him, eyes wide. "You did?" He nodded, rubbing a hand over his face. "It took me too long to see it, Vera. Too damn long. But I won't let her hurt you anymore. I won't let her have any hold over our family." The weight of his words settled between us. Liana stirred from the couch, sitting up and rubbing her eyes. "What's going on?" she mumbled. "Dad's divorcing Mom," I said, the words still feeling foreign on my tongue. Liana blinked, processing, then nodded slowly. "Good." No shock, no protest, just agreement. The next few days passed in a blur of medical tests, paperwork, and quiet conversations. My father stayed with Liana, while Sam handled most of the discharge process. When the day finally came for me to leave, I hesitated. The hospital had become a strange kind of safe space. Here, I didn't have to deal with the outside world. No memories of my mother, no reminders of the years of hurt, just quiet, sterile walls that kept everything at bay. But the real world was waiting. Sam stood beside me, his arm around my shoulders as we walked through the automatic doors. The fresh air hit me like a shock to the system. The sky was overcast, but the air was crisp, carrying the scent of rain. Liana walked ahead, talking to my father about legal documents. Sam's parents were waiting near the car, his mother holding a bouquet of soft pink flowers. "You're finally out," she said warmly, wrapping me in a gentle hug. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," I admitted. She gave me a knowing look. "That's normal. Just take it one day at a time." As Sam helped me into the car, my father hesitated. "I'll be in touch soon," he promised. "There's a lot to sort out, but I want to do better, Vera. I want to be the father I should have been." I studied him for a long moment. For years, I had been invisible to him, but now there was sincerity in his eyes. Maybe it was too late to fix the past, but for the first time, I believed he truly wanted to be here. "Okay," I said softly. "We'll figure it out." The house felt different when we got home. I had left it as a woman still clinging to the hope that my mother could change. Now I was coming back as someone who finally let go. Sam helped me settle onto the couch, adjusting the pillows behind my back. "Do you want anything? Water? Food?" I shook my head. "Just sit with me." He sat down, pulling me close. His warmth, his steady presence, was the only thing keeping me grounded. "Are you really okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. I let out a slow breath. "I don't know, but I think I will be." He kissed my forehead. "That's enough for now." We sat in silence, the weight of everything pressing down but not suffocating me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. The days blurred together. Sam worked from home for a while, refusing to leave me alone. Liana visited almost every day, bringing food, helping around the house, and just sitting with me. One afternoon, as I was folding baby clothes, Liana sighed. "I've been thinking about everything." I glanced at her. "Yeah, I want to start therapy," she admitted. "I need to process all of this, our childhood, the way Mom treated you, how I just let it happen. I don't want to carry this guilt forever." Her words struck something deep in me. "Maybe I should too," I said slowly. Liana smiled. "We can go together if you want." For the first time, it felt like we were truly sisters. A week later, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address, but I knew who it was from before I even opened it. My mother. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. "You ruined this family. You turned everyone against me. But one day you'll regret it. You'll see that you were the problem all along. A cold numbness spread through me. She hadn't changed. She never would. I walked to the trash can and dropped the letter inside. Liana watched from the kitchen. Are you okay? I turned to her, and for the first time, I smiled without hesitation. Yeah, I am. Because I wasn't the problem, and I never would be again. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, life settled into something resembling normal, or at least a new version of it. The weight of my mother's absence wasn't as suffocating as I thought it would be. If anything, the air felt lighter without her presence lingering over my life. The letter she sent was the last attempt at control, a final grasp at the strings she had spent years trying to pull. But I didn't give her the satisfaction of a response. I was done. Liana and I started therapy together, just like we had promised. The first session felt awkward, sitting across from a stranger and trying to unravel a lifetime of damage. But after a few visits, it started making sense. You were conditioned to believe love had to be earned, my therapist told me. That's not how love works. Love isn't a prize. It isn't something you have to prove yourself worthy of. Hearing those words out loud made something crack open inside me. For so long, I had bent over backward, desperate for my mother's approval. I had spent years convincing myself that if I was just better, if I tried harder, if I succeeded enough, she would finally see me. But love, real love, wasn't conditional. And I had wasted too much of my life chasing something that never existed. One evening, as I sat on the couch rubbing my growing belly, Sam walked in with a small box in his hands. "What's that?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. He sat down beside me, placing the box in my lap. "Open it." Curious, I lifted the lid, revealing a tiny silver necklace with a pendant shaped like a star. I blinked. "Sam, it's for you," he said softly, "to remind you that you were never the one who needed to change." I swallowed the lump in my throat and ran my fingers over the delicate charm. "It's beautiful." He wrapped an arm around my shoulders, kissing my temple. "So are you." For the first time in a long time, I believed him. My father kept his word. The divorce papers had been filed, and though the process was slow, he was committed to seeing it through. He visited me often, bringing groceries, baby books, and sometimes just sitting with me in comfortable silence. One afternoon, he arrived at the house looking more exhausted than usual. "Long day?" I asked, setting down my tea. He exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "Your mother's been calling again, trying to guilt me into changing my mind." My stomach tightened, and his eyes met mine, firm and unwavering. And I told her no. A breath I hadn't realized I was holding escaped me. "I don't think she knows how to exist without control," he admitted. "She's always been like this, always making people bend to her will. But I'm done being one of them." Hearing him say that felt surreal. This was the man who had stood by silently for most of my life. The man who had let my mother's cruelty continue unchecked. And yet, here he was, making a choice he should have made years ago. It didn't erase the past, but it mattered. Liana, on the other hand, was still struggling. She had spent so much of her life playing the perfect daughter that she didn't know who she was without that role. Therapy was helping, but there were still nights when she showed up at my doorstep, tears in her eyes, guilt weighing her down. "I don't know how to forgive myself," she admitted one evening, sitting on my porch swing. "I keep thinking about all those years, the way I just let it happen." I reached for her hand. "You were a kid, Liana. You didn't know." She let out a bitter laugh. "I should have. I should have asked questions. I should have seen it. You see it now." She looked at me, eyes glassy. "Is that enough?" I squeezed her fingers. "Yeah, it is." She let out a shaky breath, nodding. "I just want to be better. For you. For us." I rested my head against her shoulder. "You already are." A few days later, I got a text from my aunt, my mother's sister. "I know things are complicated, but she's struggling. Maybe one day, when you're ready, you could talk." I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. My mother was struggling? She had spent years making my life hell, and now I was supposed to feel sorry for her? Sam walked into the room, noticing the way I was gripping my phone. "Everything okay?" I showed him the message. He read it, then looked at me carefully. "What do you want to do?" That was the thing I didn't know. I wanted to say I didn't care, that it didn't affect me. But some small part of me still carried the scars of wanting to be loved by her. Some small, foolish part of me wondered if she would ever be capable of change. "Maybe I'll be ready to talk one day," I admitted. "But not now." Sam nodded. Then that's your answer. I blocked the number and put my phone down. I was finally done, letting her control my life. The baby was kicking more often now. Every little movement felt like a promise, a reminder that life was growing inside me, that something beautiful was coming out of all this pain. One night, as Sam and I lay in bed, he placed his hand on my belly, feeling the small kicks against his palm. "She's strong," he whispered. I smiled. "She has to be." His thumb traced lazy circles over my skin. "What kind of mom do you think you'll be?" I thought about it for a moment. "The kind who listens," I said finally. "The kind who makes sure she always knows she's loved." Sam kissed my forehead. "Then she's already the luckiest kid in the world." Tears pricked at my eyes, but this time, they weren't from pain. They were from hope. Time moved forward, whether I was ready for it or not. The baby's kicks became stronger. My belly grew rounder, and life kept shifting in ways I never thought possible. Liana and I still went to therapy together. Some days were harder than others. She was still working through years of guilt, still untangling the version of herself she had been from the one she was trying to become. But she was showing up. She was trying, and that was more than enough. My father was settling into his new life too. The divorce wasn't final yet, but the separation was real. He sold the house, the same house I had spent my childhood suffocating in. He didn't want to keep anything that reminded him of my mother. "You know," he told me one afternoon, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, "I keep thinking about all the things I missed." I glanced up from the laundry I was folding. "Like what?" "Your track meets," he said with a sad smile. "Your birthdays. The nights you probably cried yourself to sleep after she said something cruel." He exhaled. "I can't get those years back, Vera. But I need you to know I see you now. I really do." It still felt strange, hearing those words from him. A part of me had spent my whole life thinking I would never hear them at all. "I appreciate that, Dad." And for the first time, I meant it. One evening, Sam and I sat on the couch, flipping through baby name books. "What about Olivia?" he suggested, pointing to the page. I wrinkled my nose. I knew an Olivia in high school. She was the kind of person who'd steal your lunch and then gaslight you into thinking you never had one. Sam laughed. "Okay, no Olivia. What about Hazel?" I tilted my head. "It's cute. You don't love it, though." I sighed, placing a hand on my belly. "I want something that feels right. Something that means something." Sam studied me for a moment, then grabbed his phone. After a few minutes of scrolling, he held up the screen. "How about Nia?" he said. "It means purpose." My heart clenched. Purpose. After everything. After all the pain, after all the years of feeling like I was never enough. This baby, this tiny life growing inside me was my purpose. I smiled. "Nia. It's perfect." Sam leaned in, pressing a kiss to my forehead. "Then Nia it is." Liana came over a few days later, carrying bags of baby clothes. "I may have gone overboard," she admitted, setting them down on the couch. I picked up a tiny one, side covered in little stars. "Liana, this is adorable." She grinned. I figured she needed a good wardrobe. She's going to be the most stylish baby on the block. I chuckled, but then Liana's smile faltered. She hesitated, shifting on her feet. "There's something I need to ask you," she said quietly. I set the onesie down. "What is it?" She wrung her hands together. "I know I wasn't always the sister you needed, and I can't change the past. But," she took a shaky breath, "would you let me be Nia's godmother?" My chest tightened. Liana had been my mother's favorite, the one who got all the love I never did. But she had also been the one who sat by my hospital bed, the one who called the ambulance, the one who, when faced with the truth, chose me. Tears burned the back of my eyes. "Of course," I whispered. She let out a breath she had been holding and pulled me into a tight hug. "I promise I'll always be there for her. And for you." I believed her. A month later, my father invited me and Liana to lunch. We met at a small cafe downtown, the kind with mismatched mugs and the smell of fresh bread in the air. We talked about everyday things at first: work, books, the weather. But then Dad cleared his throat. "I've been thinking about what comes next," he said carefully. "For all of us." Liana and I exchanged a glance. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I don't want us to be distant," he admitted. "I want us to actually be a family. I want to make up for lost time." Liana nodded. "I do too." One swallowed. "I want that too, Dad. But we can't just pretend the past didn't happen." He sighed. "I know, and I don't expect that." I don't want to waste any more time. Neither did I. So I reached for Liana's hand, then for his. And for the first time in forever, I let myself believe we could build something new. One night, as I sat on the back porch, watching the stars, my phone buzzed with a message. Unknown number, I hope you're happy now. You destroyed everything. My stomach turned. I didn't have to ask who it was. I knew. Sam walked outside, immediately noticing my expression. What's wrong? I showed him the message. His jaw tightened. She just won't stop, will she? I stared at the screen for a long time before pressing the button to block the number. No, I said, but she doesn't matter anymore. Sam wrapped his arms around me, resting his chin on my shoulder. You're really free, aren't you? I nodded. Yeah, I think I am. And for the first time in my life, I felt the truth in those words. As my due date got closer, I started nesting, organizing the nursery, folding tiny clothes, reading baby books until my brain felt like mush. One afternoon, as I sat on the floor assembling a crib with Sam, Liana walked in carrying a stuffed bunny. For Nia, she said, handing it to me. I ran my fingers over the soft fur. She's gonna love it. Liana sat beside me, watching as I struggled to figure out where one of the crib pieces went. Need help? She teased. I groaned. This thing is impossible. She laughed and took the instructions from me. Okay, let's figure this out together. And as we sat there, the three of us, me, my husband, and my sister, I realized something. Family wasn't about blood. It wasn't about obligation. It was about the people who showed up, the ones who stayed. And I finally had that. Labor was nothing like the books described. The pain wasn't just a sharp contraction or a dull ache. It was all-consuming, relentless, like my body was being torn apart and rebuilt at the same time. Hours blurred together in a haze of hospital lights, whispered encouragements from Sam, and Liana gripping my hand so tightly I was sure she'd never let go. You're almost there, the doctor urged. One more push. I had nothing left in me. My body was trembling, drenched in sweat, every ounce of strength drained. But then Sam whispered in my ear, his voice thick with emotion. She's waiting for you, Vera. Our Nia's almost here. I clenched my teeth, dug deep, and gave everything I had left. And then, a cry. Loud, piercing, raw. The most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Tears streamed down my face as the doctor placed her in my arms. She was so small, so warm, her tiny fingers curling instinctively around mine. My heart swelled with a love so intense it felt impossible to contain. She's perfect, I whispered. Sam pressed a kiss to my forehead, his own tears falling freely. You did it. Liana stood beside me, wiping at her eyes. She looks just like you. I smiled, tracing Nia's delicate cheek with my finger. She's everything. In that moment, I knew this was the start of something new. A life free from the shadows of the past. A life built on love, not fear. And I was ready. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of sleepless nights, endless diaper changes, and the kind of exhaustion that settled deep into my bones. But it was also full of soft coos, tiny hands reaching for mine, and the overwhelming feeling that, for the first time in my life, I belonged somewhere. My father came by every weekend, always bringing something: groceries, baby books, or just himself. He held Nia like she was the most precious thing in the world, his usually stoic face melting into something softer every time she gripped his finger. She's going to know love, he said one afternoon, rocking her gently. I swear it. I believed him. Liana visited almost daily, always insisting she was just dropping by, but somehow staying for hours. She was a natural with Nia, making silly faces, singing lullabies off-key, promising to teach her all the important things in life, like how to stand up for herself and how to always buy the good ice cream. One night, as we sat in the nursery watching Nia sleep, she turned to me. Do you think she'll ever meet Mom? The question made my stomach tighten, but I had already made up my mind. No, I said firmly. She doesn't need to know that kind of pain. Liana nodded, but her expression was conflicted. Do you ever think she'll change? I let out a slow breath. I used to, but not anymore. Some people were too caught up in their own bitterness to ever see beyond it. My mother had made her choice, and I had made mine. Months passed, and with them came new milestones. Nia's first laugh, her first time rolling over, the first time she wrapped her little arms around my neck in a clumsy hug. Each moment felt like a small victory, proof that I was building something better for her. One evening, Sam and I sat on the porch, watching the sunset while Nia dozed in his arms. The sky was painted in shades of gold and pink, the air crisp with the scent of autumn. "I don't think I ever imagined life like this," I admitted. Sam glanced at me. "Like what?" "Peaceful," I said simply. "Safe." He kissed my temple. "You deserve it," I exhaled, letting his words sink in. For so long, I had felt like I was running, trying to prove myself, trying to earn love, trying to escape the weight of my past. But I wasn't running anymore. I was home. A year passed in the blink of an eye. On Nia's first birthday, we threw a small party in the backyard. Nothing extravagant, just family, close friends, a few decorations, and a tiny cake that she smashed with pure delight. Liana snapped pictures while my father held Nia up in the air, making her giggle. Sam's parents sat nearby, watching with warm smiles. This was my family. Not the one I had been born into, but the one I had chosen, the one that had chosen me. As the sun set, I sat on the grass, holding Nia close as she yawned against my shoulder. Sam sat beside me, wrapping an arm around us. Liana plopped down next to us with a sigh. "Okay, I think I took 100 pictures." I laughed. "That's an understatement." She smirked. "Well, she only turns one once." My father sat down on my other side, watching Nia with quiet affection. "You're doing a good job, Vera," he said after a moment. "She's lucky to have you." The words hit me harder than I expected. All my life, I had wanted to hear that. But the thing was, I didn't need it anymore, because I knew it was true. I had broken the cycle. I had created something beautiful from the ashes of the past. I had found love in the places I never thought to look. And as I sat there, surrounded by the people who had chosen to stand by me, with my daughter safe in my arms, I knew this was just the beginning. A new chapter, a new legacy. And I was ready for all of it. Story 2, in early September, as the season changed to fall, in a peaceful residential area of Columbus, Ohio. In a little 2-story house on one corner, the maple trees that bordered the streets were slowly starting to turn color. Tyler, Carol Wilson's son, resided with her. Carol had gained trust as a mid-level employee over her more than 10 years of employment at the local accounting business, Adams Accounting. To manage job and family life, she always paid close attention to how she looked, keeping her light brown hair in a tidy bob. She was very meticulous about her timetable. "Heat up a frozen pizza for me, Mom. I'll be late today." Tyler, 16, was tall, with his mother's light brown hair and his father Michael's beautiful blue eyes. He frequently spent time with friends and played football for his high school team. "Once practice is over, when are you going to get home? You must return by 10, Carol remarked, turning around. I know, Tyler said, nonchalantly waving his hand. 5 years had passed since Carol Wilson and Michael Wilson's divorce. Michael had supported the family by working as a supervisor on a construction site, but he progressively started arriving home late because of work obligations and started drinking too much. On the day Michael forgot Tyler's 11th birthday, the arguments grew more heated, and Carol finally made her choice. Michael relocated to the West Coast from Ohio following the divorce. He spoke to Tyler occasionally, but they had become estranged. He paid his child support on time, but that was the limit of his paternal duties. Diane and Harold Johnson, Carol's parents, resided in a posh suburban neighborhood. Harold had amassed a sizable fortune while working as an executive at a real estate development firm before to retiring. Diane was a well-known housewife from the upper class in the community. Carol, you could have a lot better life if you only put forth a little more effort. Every time Diane saw her daughter, she stated that. It seemed like little more than criticism to Carol. Linda was Carol's sister. Linda, who now worked in a high-end Cincinnati boutique, had studied fashion design in college. Unmarried, she drove a white BMW throughout town. People around her were envious of what her parents had given her for the holidays. Linda is returning to Paris. Your father gave it to you as a birthday present. Diane would smile condescendingly at Carol and mention Linda's achievements. Since they were young, Carol and Linda's relationship has been tumultuous. Linda was always given preference by their parents, who complied with all of her requests. Carol, on the other hand, was frequently urged to exercise patience because she was the older sister. Carol achieved consecutive, as in school, and it was accepted without any ceremony. However, Linda received a lot of accolades after receiving a B. This weekend, my parents and I are heading to the beach. Shall I bring Tyler along? Linda would say, her superiority complex towards Carol barely disguised. In this familial dynamic, she had been pampered by her parents and brought up to focus only on obtaining what she desired. From a young age, Carol had developed her independence. After receiving a scholarship to college, she started working at an accounting business right away. Upon graduation, divorce after marriage to Michael Tyler's birth. Through it all, she had developed resilience and strength. You are my delight and pride, Tyler. Carol used to tell her son that Tyler was appreciative and understood his mother's hardships. He put a lot of effort into his education in athletics, with the goal of attending medical school. Carol's family now consisted solely of Tyler, but she continued to communicate with her parents and Linda when required. The annual emotional separation between them. There were moments when she questioned the nature of her family, but every time she saw Tyler grin, it helped her put her face forward once more. Tyler was late returning home on a Tuesday night, which made Carol nervous. He ought to have come back while making dinner ages ago. Every now and again, she peered out the window, trying to find her son. He must have had a late practice. As she grabbed up her phone and dialed Tyler, she whispered to herself. However, there was no response, just a ringing tone. The phone rang 10 minutes later, and it was Carol. The number on the screen was unknown. "Hello," she said. "This is Carol Wilson. This is Jones from Mercy General Hospital's emergency room. There was a traffic accident involving your son. Could you visit the hospital right now?" Carol's heart raced, yet the voice on the phone seemed serene. Her voice stuck in her throat and her hands shook. "What? What's wrong with him?" She was able to speak. "At the hospital, we'll talk about the specifics. Kindly arrive as soon as you can." Without even putting on a coat, Carol snatched up her keys, switched off the stove, and hopped into her car. It was raining coldly now. The time on the dashboard was 8:15 p.m. Carol thought the ride to the hospital took forever, even though it usually took 20 minutes. "Tyler, it's all right. Mama will be there immediately." Carol hurried through the rain after parking at Mercy General Hospital's emergency door. A nurse at the emergency room escorted her inside after she revealed her son's name. A middle-aged physician was standing by. His look was solemn, and Carol felt a chill run down her spine. "About your son's condition. He was struck by a car at an intersection when he was out with a friend. He is presently in a coma after suffering a serious head injury. His intracranial pressure is high, and there is internal bleeding." To Carol, these words seemed weak and far away. She felt wobbly on her feet and her vision contracted. "Sit down, please." Her elbow was supported by the doctor. "We're getting ready for emergency surgery right now. We must lower the cerebral pressure and halt the internal bleeding. Is he going to live?" Carol's lips quivered as she asked. After a little pause, the doctor responded, "We'll try our hardest." The chances of a recovery, however, are now uncertain. Carol covered her face with her hands as she sat in a chair outside the surgery room. The tears came uncontrollably. Tyler's birth date, his initial steps, the day he started school, his grin. All of these recollections came flooding back to her like a reel of film yesterday morning. 4 hours were spent on the procedure. The doctor showed there at 1 a.m, looking exhausted. The procedure went well. The internal bleeding has stopped, and the pressure inside the brain has leveled off. But he's still in a coma. It will be crucial during the next 48 hours. The ICU was where Carol saw Tyler. He had 4 intubation tubes in his arm and 1 in his mouth, and half of his face was bandaged. The monitors beeped in time. "Mama is here," she muttered as she clutched her son's hand. "You're a boy with strength. Wake up, please." Carol phoned her accounting business and made arrangements for emergency leave in the morning after taking a snooze on a hospital cot. Margaret, her manager, was kind and advised her to take as much time as she needed. "Tyler's recovery is something I'm hoping for," a nurse inquired in the afternoon. "Have you spoken to your relatives?" It dawned on Carol that she hadn't considered phoning her parents. In the astonishment and bewilderment, she dialed her mother's phone, her fingers shaking. She heard Diane's voice after 3 rings. "This is rare, Carol. What's the matter?" Carol fought back tears as she described the circumstances. "Tyler has been involved in an incident. He's unconscious." When she finished speaking, Carol inhaled deeply. "I'm at the medical facility. I need assistance." Then there was stillness on the other end. "That's awful, but he'll be all right, right?" He is young. Carol listened incredulously. No, he's not doing well. The damage to his brain is evident. I apologize, but next week, Linda and I are going to Hawaii. It has taken us 3 months to plan. We will not receive our money back if we cancel now. Carol felt a wave of coldness sweep across her heart. You'll be all right when my son is on the verge of death. You've always been independent. When we return from the trip, Diane remarked, we will see how he is doing. I will also inform Linda. Carol didn't say anything and hung up. Her cheeks were wet with tears. When she got back to Tyler's room, she stood by the window and peered out. There were gray clouds in the sky, but the rain had ceased. However, Tyler's health had stabilized after 3 days. He was still in a coma. Carol could hardly take a shower and slept in a hospital chair. To help her, her co-workers Mark and Jennifer alternated going to the hospital. In addition to bringing food and clothes, they occasionally remained with Tyler so she could return home and relax. Jennifer remarked, "You need to take a short nap, Carol, or you'll pass out. Go home for at least an hour. I'll stay here." Carol was appreciative of her friend's generosity. On the morning of the 4th day, however, her parents had not gotten in touch. Carol decided to ban Linda and her parents on social media. She erased them from her contacts and took them off of her list of pals. "I no longer require them," she said. Carol was softly petting Tyler's head that afternoon when the door to the hospital room was knocked on. A nurse stated, "Miss Wilson, you have a phone call." Carol went to the station of the nurse. "Call." Her mother's number appeared on the screen. She hesitated for a second, then pulled Carol up. "We have returned from Hawaii. The trip was fantastic." Diane's tone was upbeat and unrepentant. "How is Tyler doing now?" Carol remained silent. "It's rather juvenile of you to block us on social media, by the way." "We are related." Carol remained silent. "Is Tyler dead?" Diane's tone became icier. "Could you share some insurance money, if there is any? Linda is attempting to purchase a condominium, you know." Carol's hands started trembling. She was unable to speak. As she stood there in disbelief, tears filled her eyes. "Are you listening, Carol?" Carol hung up the receiver slowly and silently. She hugged her quivering shoulders and fell into a seat in the corridor. Beside her, Nurse Judy took a seat. "Are you all right?" Carol raised her gaze to her eyes. It was something more than sadness, a feeling of resolve. "I'm all right. I'm done." After saying that, she got up and went back to Tyler's room. Tyler's pallid face was softly caressed by the early sunlight that streamed through Mercy General Hospital's windows. Carol reviewed work paperwork while sitting in the bedside chair and held her son's hand. Even though the accident had happened a week ago, Tyler's health had not changed much. "Miss Wilson, good morning." In her mid-40s, Nurse Becky Clark opened the door with a happy voice. Families of ICU patients trusted her because of her kind demeanor and effective job. "Vital signs are steady this morning, and the brain waves have somewhat improved." Carol forced a weary grin. "Becky, thank you," Becky questioned as she looked at Tyler's monitors. "Have you had any food?" Carol gave a head shake. "Not quite yet. It won't work," Becky reprimanded gently. "At 1 o'clock I begin my lunch break. Don't say no, and let's have a meal at the cafeteria." Carol gave a gracious nod. Becky has been Tyler's emotional support system for the last week, taking care of both her health and Tyler. Dr. Ramsey stopped over for rounds just after noon, just as Carol was wrapping up her office email responses. He was Tyler's attending physician and the lead neurosurgeon. "Could we just have a little conversation, Miss Wilson?" They entered the corridor. Dr. Ramsey started off very gently explaining, "I've reviewed Tyler's most recent MRI findings. His brain is slowly becoming less swollen. This is encouraging." There was a flicker of optimism for Carol. "Does that imply that he will awaken?" "The likelihood is undoubtedly growing." The doctor was careful what he said. "Recovery from a coma is uncertain, though. It can take some time, but we're doing our hardest." Carol inhaled deeply. "I get it. Can I help in any way?" "There is, in fact. According to research, patients frequently maintain their hearing even while they are unconscious. Speaking with him can help him recuperate by stimulating his brain. Talk about your memories. Everyday occurrences. Really, anything." Carol held her son's hand and started conversing as they returned to Tyler's room. She talked about Tyler when she was younger, events and recollections from school. They parted, sometimes with laughter and other times with tears. Carol observed a slight alteration later that afternoon when discussing Wednesday's football practice with Tyler. Tyler had made a little movement with his fingertips. "Tyler." Carol took a deep breath. "Make another movement with your fingers." However, there was no further reply. When Becky hurried in, Carol hurriedly hit the nurse call button. Carol gave an enthusiastic explanation. There was a little but distinct movement of his fingers. Becky tested Tyler's neurological reflexes and took a close look at his hand. "This is a positive indicator, even if it can just be a reflex." That evening, I'll tell Dr. Ramsey about it. Carol spent the night in the bathroom after borrowing the hospital shower at Becky's suggestion. She said, "I'll be back in the morning, Tyler." When Carol got back to the hospital the following morning, Tyler's room was occupied by a conference of the medical staff. "We're seeing changes in Tyler's brainwaves, suggesting an improvement in consciousness level," stated Dr. Ramsey as she walked up. "This is unquestionably a good trend, but we still need to pay close attention." Carol's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." Talking to Tyler became a regular ritual for Carol after that day. She read novels and gave updates on her son's school pals. As she sat by his bed for hours, Tyler's buddies would occasionally stop by the hospital and speak with him briefly. 2 weeks after the accident, Carol's cell phone called on Monday morning. Linda appeared on the screen. "It's been a while," Carol said after hesitating for a second. Linda's voice was upbeat. "Regarding Tyler, I'm rather concerned," Carol calmly answered. "Hi there? Mom called me. She said that although you hung up on her, she was only worried." Carol smiled bitterly. "Speaking about insurance money," Linda added, picking her words carefully. "I'm worried about that. My parents instructed me to give you a call. They are also worried about Tyler." "Really?" There was cynicism in Carol's voice. "They would also like to know whether there has been any development about the insurance." Carol felt her temper building. Tyler is still alive. "Talking about insurance money is not appropriate at this time. Naturally. It's just preparing for the worst," Linda answered hastily. "It must be difficult for you to be by yourself. Financial support might be helpful." Carol's tone faltered. "You folks just think about money when my son is on the verge of death. I did not intend that." "That's sufficient." Carol spoke strongly but calmly. "Never call again. I no longer have any business with you or our parents." Carol hung up and let out a long sigh. Anger and despair flooded her heart, but she also had an odd sensation of freedom. She had lost all expectations of them. The hospital social worker, Elena Sanchez, was waiting when she returned to Tyler's room. She made frequent visits to hear about Carol's circumstances and provide assistance. "What's the matter? You appear pallid," Elena inquired worriedly. With a sigh, Carol informed her about her sister's call. Elena paid close attention and made notes. "If I may give you some advice, Miss Wilson," she added gravely. "If at all feasible, I advise you to document all of your family's correspondence, including emails, texts, phone conversations, and recordings." Elena gently indicated why you could want legal protection later on, particularly with relation to Tyler's possessions or care. The actions of your sister and parents demonstrate unwarranted financial interest. In the future, this may turn into guardianship problems. Carol gave a nod. "I get it, but is recording permitted in Ohio? As long as you are aware of it, one-party consent is acceptable." Elena gestured towards Carol's cell phone. That night, it would be nice to have a basic recording app. Carol loaded a recording app onto her phone, as Elena had advised. She knew she had to protect Tyler, but she never imagined she would go this far. The hospital's accounting department sent insurance paperwork the next day. Carol went over them carefully and completed the necessary fields. Insurance would probably cover the majority of the accident treatment expenses, but further applications would be required for long-term rehabilitation. "Is anything wrong?" Nancy from accounting was questioned. "No, everything is all right," Carol grinned. "My family just has a peculiar stake in the insurance proceeds." Nancy's face was one of sympathy, which is common. Regretfully, at the conclusion of that week, don't hesitate to communicate with me if you need anything. With Tyler's brainwaves continuing to improve and his neurological reflexes becoming more active, his medical team called another examination session. They started to be cautiously optimistic. "There are unquestionably indications of recovery. Of course, the road to full recovery may be long, but we are hopeful," said Dr. Ramsey. Carol expressed her gratitude to the physicians. Her heart had been filled with a fresh sense of optimism. She was resolved to do whatever it necessary to keep Tyler safe when he returned. It had begun to rain outside as they returned to the room, but Carol's heart was unclouded. She walked up to Tyler's bed and spoke softly. "Tyler, it won't be long. It's almost time for you to come back to us. Here, Mama will always be waiting." She also gave her son's hand a squeeze. "Mom?" The quiet in the hospital room was broken by a faint voice. Carol peered at the bed after looking up from the magazines she was reading. Tyler was staring at her with his eyes half open. "Tyler." With a cry, Carol ran to her son's side. "Do you hear me?" "Mom is here." Tyler's mouth twitched. "Mom? Where?" In a flash, Carol was holding her son's hand and pressing the nurse call button. The room was filled with medical personnel. The first person there was Becky, who phoned for a doctor right away. "You're in the hospital, Tyler. You were in an accident. However, it's all right. You've returned." Carol's voice shook with relief and pleasure. In addition to checking Tyler's student answer, Dr. Ramsey posed a few straightforward queries. "What's your name, Tyler?" "Wilson." The boy's voice was husky when he replied. "Which grade do you currently hold?" After giving it some thought, Tyler said, "Second year of high school." Dr. Ramsey gave a satisfied nod. He is obviously conscious. It appears that basic cognitive abilities are maintained. Carol was left alone with her kid following the test. Although Tyler was still frail and unable to speak for extended periods of time, his eyes showed clear awareness. "For what length of time?" he inquired. 3 weeks, Carol said. "Have you been sleeping?" Tyler gave a slow nod. "Did you feel afraid?" Carol's eyes filled with tears. "Indeed, very. You were powerful, though. Really powerful." Tyler steadily improved his ability to remain awake for extended amounts of time that afternoon. Despite his confusion, he recognized Carol and the medical personnel. Following an evaluation by the rehabilitation team, arrangements were made to start mild therapy. The next day, it's a miracle. His age and level of physical condition, according to physical therapist Michael Chin, are aiding in his recuperation. The path ahead is long, of sure, but he will overcome it. Carol's happiness was uncontrollable. She relayed the news of Tyler's waking to her friends and coworkers. As Carol was assisting Tyler with breakfast the following morning, congratulations and encouraging remarks flooded in. The door to the hospital room opened. She turned to see Linda and her dad standing there. "Carol, Diane informed us that Tyler had awakened her mother. We arrived immediately." Carol was stunned for a time. Despite the wrath and caution in her heart, she made an effort to maintain her composure with Tyler. "Keep in mind that they are Aunt Linda, Grandma, and Grandpa Tyler." Carol sounded calm as she spoke. Tyler gave them a bewildered expression. "Yes, indeed." Diane smiled sweetly as she walked up to Tyler's bed. "You've gone through a lot, Tyler. Grandma and Papa were really anxious." Harold gave his grandson a gentle shoulder pat while he stood beside the bed. "You're a boy with strength. You have Wilson ancestry." Linda removed a brand name watch, a get-well present, and a tiny package from her fancy purse, ideal for a boy in high school. Do you not think? Their unexpected arrival and overly friendly demeanor unnerved Carol. After 3 weeks without communication, they showed up as soon as Tyler woke up. And pricey presents. She placed her phone in her pocket and tapped the icon for the recording app. "Carol, would you mind spending some time with me in the hallway?" When the two were in the hallway, Diane inquired. Diane's voice shifted. "You should have informed us that Tyler had woken up. We are related." "Family?" When he was in a coma, Carol commented cynically. "Did you visit Hawaii?" "We had no choice. The reservation could not be canceled." "Mom, that's sufficient," Carol whispered. "I am aware of your current motivation, but I must caution you. Don't put Tyler through needless stress." Harold and Tyler were back in the room, arguing awkwardly. Carol was on a quick business call that afternoon when Linda was checking her phone beside the window. Carol was on her way back from outside the door when Harold sat down at Tyler's bedside. She heard what he said. "About your insurance, Tyler. Have the procedures been initiated by your mother?" When Carol came in, Tyler's countenance was bewildered as he gazed at his granddad. "Insurance? What are you discussing?" Carol questioned icily. Harold quickly shifted the topic. "Oh, for the future only. Cost for college and so forth." After his therapy session that evening, Tyler questioned his mother where Grandma and Grandpa were truly concerned about me. Carol was taken aback by her son's insight. Even though he was still recuperating, he sensed what was happening. "Let me tell you the truth." She inhaled deeply. "Mom and Dad don't prioritize us. Not this time, in particular." Tyler gave a slow nod. "You were the only one that remained by my side as I slept. Is I correct?" Carol took the hand of her son. Everybody expresses love in a different manner. I was there for you, though. Tyler's recovery was making steady progress the next day. His speech treatment was progressing well, and he could walk short distances with help. His recuperation astounded the physicians, who then started talking about discharge arrangements. Dr. Ramsey informed Carol that he should be able to return home in around 3 days. Outpatient rehabilitation will, of course, have to go on. This news thrilled Carol, who conferred with the medical personnel to organize a little departure celebration. She gathered Tyler's buddies and decorated the space. And just as expected, Linda and her parents agreed to come the afternoon before she was released from the hospital. Balloons and congrats were used to adorn the space. Banners. One by one, Tyler's pals arrived, and nursing staff members, including Becky, stopped over to congratulate him. Carol was preparing in silence. Before her parents and Linda came at 3 o'clock, she had prepared everything after consulting with Elena, the social worker. Harold, Linda, and Diane showed up. Grinning broadly, they came in and presented Tyler with presents. "Would you mind giving me a moment of your time?" Carol remarked softly as she stood in the middle of the space. Pulling out a tablet, she touched the button. The room's air froze. Calmly, Carol said, "These are recordings from the last 3 weeks. They depict the actions of Linda and my parents throughout Tyler's coma." Diane's statement that the Hawaii trip could not be canceled started to play on the tapes. Harold's questioning of Tyler and Linda's inquiries regarding insurance money were all captured on tape. "My only real family member is my kid, Tyler." Carol's voice was full with conviction. "I'll do everything in my power to help him get better, but I won't let anyone, not even his biological family, try to take advantage of him." There was silence in the room. Diane's face lost its color. Linda dropped her eyes in shame. Harold shuddered with rage. "Mom." From the bed, Tyler called. "I'm proud of my mother," he stated firmly as he slowly sat up. "She showed me that true family consists of those who support you during difficult times." Carol approached and wrapped her arm around her son's shoulders. After a year, Carol's garden was filled with vibrant flowers, and a brand new set of garden tables was placed on the wooden deck. "I received a letter of admission, Mom." With a note in hand, Tyler rushed into the living room and gave Carol a hug. After graduating high school, he applied to the medical school at Ohio State University for a unique scholarship. "Well done." Carol gave her son a firm embrace. "I had faith in your ability." Tyler had recovered more quickly than the doctor had anticipated. He had gone back to school and rejoined the football squad 6 months after the accident. With consistent physical treatment, the little numbness that persisted in his left leg was getting better. He had also made the decision to become an emergency physician as a result of his experience with the accident and his recuperation. Carol had also started down a new path. She was making good success in her job at the accounting business. She had recently been promoted to department manager this spring, and she was also progressively paying off her home mortgage and gaining financial security. Tyler took juice out of the refrigerator and added, "Oh, by the way, Mom, Aunt Linda sent a letter." Carol grinned. She was slowly rebuilding her friendship with Linda. Linda had sent a heartfelt letter of apology a few months after that day in the hospital. She was reassessing her life and had started to distance herself from their parents. They now established a relationship in which they called each other once a month to update each other on their circumstances. "Let's read it." Carol pulled the packet open. In her letter, Linda explained how she had moved into a flat and paid the rent alone for the first time after beginning to teach art to kids at a nearby nonprofit. Carol remarked thoughtfully, "She's changed too." Harold and Diane, however, continued to deny their guilt. Linda said that they had lost their reputation in the community and that many of their friends had deserted them. At the golf club, they were now rumored to be the couple who stole their grandson's insurance money. "Would you like to see your grandparents?" Carol questioned Tyler. After giving it some thought, Tyler answered, "Perhaps someday. But right now, it's just the two of us." Carol sat on the porch that evening and gazed up at the glittering sky, thinking back on the previous year's events. Despite some difficult and depressing moments, the trip had eventually deepened her and Tyler's relationship. When she opened the front door when the doorbell rung, Becky and a few hospital employees were there. Family surprise was one of the threads that had held them together since the disaster. They came in with a cake. We came to rejoice at Tyler's approval. Words of congratulations and lively laughter filled the house. Carol grinned broadly, enjoying herself. This is really family. People who are united by love and support rather than blood. A fresh chapter and a new path had begun in Carol's life. She would stroll with this new family rather than by herself.